If we could just start by just getting a sense of what your different roles are, what your organisation is. Give me one quick sentence on your organisation, and you know, and the other thing I guess wanted to know is where does your money come from? What's your source of funding? So who you are and where does the money come from? Start Ella.
Hi, this is the right one. The good one? Can you hear me? Okay. Ella Goldner. I'm one of the 3 co-founders of Zinc and the general manager, so that's what I do. What we do is a bit different, I think, to some of the other investors. We're called Zinc VC, but we're trying to confuse everyone. We're actually not a VC. We have a 6 months program where we take entrepreneurs, so people who want to set up new businesses that are socially driven. So every 6 months we have a specific mission. This one, which started in October, is looking at women's emotional and mental health issues, and kind of going back to those conversations before, we see it as a commercial opportunity. So it's about setting up new tech businesses that are scalable, that are commercial. And so we're funded, hopefully about to announce our round. We're funded by both a mix of social kind of impact investors and VCs, as well as angels. So we're trying to kind of show how this ecosystem, going back to Paul's point, how this ecosystem comes together to create new businesses that are for good and commercial.
Cool. Great, can you guys hear me? Cool. So I'm Teddy, I work at Mustard Seed. We're an early stage investor in what we call lockstep businesses. So what we mean by lockstep is we look for businesses whereby that social impact, that social outcome, is not only an inextricable part of the business, but it's actually what drives the commercial success of that business. I'm probably just throwing a bunch of more to this kind of brouhaha about what is impact investing. And in my opinion, there's no right or wrong way of impact investing, but we just have our own thesis, which is looking for these lockstep businesses and believing that these are the businesses that are going to outperform in the markets. A good example of those two would be actually Winnow and What 3 Words, who are here today. So we were seed stage investors in both businesses. So that's a little bit about us.
So Teddy, where does the money that supports Mustard come
Off of
from?
trees, actually, it just grows. No, I'm just kidding. It falls from the sky. No, so it's a really interesting question because I actually have a lot of qualms about this. It might not be completely PC to raise this with you guys here and with this crowd, but I think the whole impact investing space, it's not a sector. I don't think it should be considered its own sector, but it's a testament to how I think culturally we think about what is good. I actually have qualms about actually the name of this conference because Tech for Good, everyone in this room will have a different definition of what good is, let alone what is impact investing, right? Sorry, it's a really long-winded answer, but our funds come from mostly individual, smaller family offices, smaller institutions to date. We are raising a new fund, which will likely be backed by a larger institution who has not typically invested in impact funds before, so it'll be a first for them. But we can talk more about my qualms later. Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
That was really interesting, Teddy. I'm Amay. I lead financial services investments in Africa for Omidyar Network, which is an impact investment fund. And there are, of course, many definitions to that vexing word, impact or good. And I think we'll deconstruct some of that in the panel. Omidyar Network, all the money comes from this individual called Pierre Omidyar, who founded eBay and realized that foundation wasn't the game that he wanted to play, and it wasn't a trade-off between commercial and social returns in his mind. And we can talk about whether there is or not.
So as you heard from my question at the beginning probably, we just launched Seed Tribe a couple of weeks ago, but Seed Tribe is an offshoot of Angel Investment Network. So Angel Investment Network launched 13 years ago as an open marketplace for entrepreneurs to post their idea onto the network, and angel investors come to invest in these businesses. Seed Tribe is an offshoot of it, which launched 2 weeks ago, is amazingly entirely self-funded from the profits of the wider Angel Investment Network. And the founders essentially saw an opportunity to be able to do good by using the profits from their own company in order to support more impactful companies. So I guess we're in an amazing position that we don't need to justify our existence to anyone external, which means that we don't have any sort of external pressures to reach targets that we don't want to reach, and we're just solely interested in finding great businesses that do have an impact and helping leverage our existing network of 160,000 registered investors in order to invest in these impactful businesses.
Great. All right. Thanks, Liv. I mean, it's a really good range of kind of investment sources here, and when you think about tech for good, you think, well, it's a sort of slightly Cinderella sector that doesn't have access to funding, but this is clearly just from the panel here and from the availability of new funds coming on stream, we know that is not true. I was very taken with the synopsis for this session, which presented a very optimistic picture about the case for tech for good, about it being a good opportunity for returns, and very interested. I think we can perhaps talk around some of those things, and I think the case for purpose it has been made. There's been some good examples of some work that's come out in the last couple of weeks. B Corp just put out a report last week that showed that businesses that have purpose are growing something like 28 times faster than businesses that don't have purpose. Unlimited put out a report a few weeks ago which talked about consumer demand for organizations which are working with purpose. And we know about millennials' desire to work for organizations that have got purpose and goodness built into their work. So there's no shortage of impetus behind this movement. But from an investment point of view, does it make money? And from your perspective, why have you gone into tech for good? Is it for making money, or is it for because you want to make the world a better place? And any of you can take that.
I can start with the microphone. I totally agree with Tamsin's point earlier, actually, that it really depends on what the actual business is. Some of them there's just no compromise. I mean, if you look at renewables, the circular economy, etc., there's just awesome returns and really great reduction of carbon emissions overall. There are others which are a lot more difficult to just purely have a sort of financial return. I would say from the perspective of Angel Investment Network, it's a blend of the two. I think we saw a really good opportunity, and we wouldn't have done it if we thought that there wouldn't be a good potential return on our money. It's a really big growing market, and I think we're in an amazing position with our existing network to be able to capitalize on this new market. But at the same time, because we're in this nice position with the overall network, there was absolutely also just a desire, within the company, we're all just really excited about making the world a better place. And we are very happy to take on that extra risk in order to support companies that are not necessarily going to be the next billion-dollar company, but actually will make everything better. So our role is really to be able to put it to our network of investors to excite them about coming into these businesses. And it really depends on their purpose. We ask a lot of questions from investors who sign up to the platform, why they joined, and there's such a diversity of reasons for people coming on. Some people are just like, I'm not getting enough of a return in, with my savings in the bank, and I just think this could be a good opportunity. And others think, actually, I was an entrepreneur myself. I did really well. I want to come back and support the ecosystem. And I want to make the world a better place, and I'm prepared to put capital at risk in order to do it, because it makes me feel great. And I think, coming back to that question of purpose, I feel, we're all worried about AI and what the world is going to do with tech overtaking us, but actually I feel that what's important is human beings having their own purpose. And I think if we all learned to find our purpose, we wouldn't need to be worried about the external factors so much.
Right, thank you, Liv. So Media Network obviously is a very philanthropic-driven fund, and in terms of, but what's your kind of investment thesis? And why tech for good, and why does it show returns, or do you believe that it does?
Look, it's based on the fundamental assumption that people are inherently good, and what they lack is opportunity, and that talent is much more equally distributed than opportunity. And the thesis is, if you provide the opportunity, if you open the door, people will at least start from the same spot on the racing track. They may not finish at the same spot. Everyone has their own individual abilities and so on and so forth. But what we're trying to do is level set the field by providing equal opportunities. And I'm not saying anything new. I think a lot of impact investment funds would say the same thing. But when you get to returns and commercial returns, I think it's a very nuanced question. And I appreciate your point around it differs by business and by verticals, I would argue. From a Media Network's perspective, our first bottom line is impact. And we have quite a detailed way of describing it, and I won't get into that because it differs by sector. And we can talk about that later. But we also believe that in the ideal case, commercial returns are fully tied with social returns. I'll give you an example, right? Sorry, I missed most, I just arrived, but I heard someone, I think from Prodigy Finance, talking about credit. And I've funded a lot of credit businesses. If you're talking about microcredit, I think it qualifies as a business where the social returns and commercial returns can be quite tied, right? If I look at the social returns as the number of people you lend to, that's quite nicely tied to the commercial returns because that's your book size and you earn interest on that. Where does it not tie? When you're trying to work in a market where the market infrastructure is absent. Teacher training in India, can't make money out of it, but it's absolutely critical for the education sector. So we would fund both the credit business and the teacher training shop in India, but we'd be expecting different returns. In the credit business, we would expect commercial returns. In the teacher training business, understanding the market, we'd be okay with sub-commercial returns.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, Teddy, is that something you agree with?
Yes and no. I was thinking, as everyone on the panel was answering the question, and I think it really depends on which stakeholder you're thinking about this from, which perspective you're thinking about it from, because I touched on it in the little intro we did, but there's no right way or wrong way of impact investing, I think, because there's so many different social problems out there, and all these problems cannot be solved by this lockstep business model that I said that we focus on. There's a place for third sector, there's a place for government. There's a reason why New York City spends $20 billion a year on just welfare spending. It's because they need to provide that aid for certain individuals, for certain social problems that can't be solved by a scalable commercial model. I think that's one thing. And just going back to my first point on stakeholders, for us, we look for the same amount of returns for our investors as any early stage seed fund would. And our first seed fund, knock on wood, but I don't have any wood, but it performs on top quartile as any of the other worldwide early stage seed funds, and that's what we target for our investors. And tied to that, of course, that means we're looking for these very highly scalable, high growth companies at seed stage. But for us, we try to identify these companies that are, like I said, lockstep, where not only is that social impact inextricably tied to the business, which I think ties to, what was said here, but it's what drives the commercial success. It's what makes that business successful. It's what causes it it allows it to scale and achieve that potential. So not every business is like that. I think we invested in 5 new companies last year. We saw over 2,500 businesses, so that's quite a small percentage that we ended up investing in. So that's what I would say on that.
Sure. Ellie, you take a slightly different approach about building businesses from the ground up, but what are you looking for?
Yeah, so I think going back to the previous panel, I think because we're basically what we recruit or we invest is founders. So we take people on the program before they even have a business idea, and we help them match them with their co-founders and with the problem they want to solve, but we give them the overarching kind of mission. So as I said, mental health issues, or next one is around second chances in life or loneliness and isolation. So we pick those areas where we believe that there is a commercial opportunity. So for example, with women and girls' emotional and mental health, another $100 billion market. So we see a commercial opportunity. We know that government is pouring money, but it's not solving the issue yet. So, and we also think that technology can make a huge impact and change the landscape and give consumers the power to change their lives. So that's kind of our thesis. And what we say, if we bring the right talent, the right kind of input from IP and ideas from social sciences, from universities, and you tie that together with the commercial mindset, then we believe we can create the next potentially billion-dollar company that will also not bad, and also is designed to do good. So going back to that kind of, again, that panel about the perseverance around the problem. So we start with the problem. This is not a situation where someone came up with a solution and they're thinking, okay, where can we fit it? So we have a piece of tech or we have an insight. Actually, you start from the problem. You start what it is that I'm trying to solve for. Is it women, getting pregnant and not having where to go to? Is it people suffering from IBS? Is it young women not having enough access to sexual education? So we're really, the founders really look at a problem and then they try to find the solution and the technology that will enable to do that. So our belief is that actually we invest in those people, in those teams, because they have the belief in what they're doing. So that's going to be designed in a way that you don't have to keep measuring the impact in such a rigid way because it's designed in that way. So this is consumer obsessed, consumer focused by design. And you have people who are there for a reason. So they've all left jobs, they've relocated. So MBAs, serial entrepreneurs, people who just graduated from computer sciences. So they're all there. They could have taken a job at Google. They could have taken a job at investment banking or Bain, but they choose to come and set up their own businesses. So that creates another element of energy. So our thesis is that by putting them together in the room, surrounding them with people with great ideas and capabilities, and giving them an injection of capital, then can create those big, impactful global businesses.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the I word, impact, a little bit, because we've touched on the issue of returns not just being commercial, and all of you who've got are driven by a desire to see a social impact and social good in the world. But what does that actually mean? So if someone's come to you with a great idea as a startup and they say, well, I've got this stuff which is going to improve education in Africa, or is going to save on water consumption, or help health in some other ways, how do you kind of make the call? I mean, what's your kind of filter for kind of like making a selection, if you like, for what's a good impact for good investment?
There is an answer that I have personally, and then there is an answer for Omidyar Network. I think personally, I favor a very broad spectrum for impact. I don't know if the people know, but IFC, International Finance Corporation, would fund 5-star hotels in a lot of countries because they believe that nothing and absolutely nothing drives impact like funding 5-star hotels, because it's tourism and employment for 2 years and so on. And I heard a person I respect a lot in India say that if you're running an ethical business, so take away vice businesses and gambling and so on, if you run an ethical business, it is a business with purpose, otherwise why are you running it, right? You're making something for people to use. And it could be lingerie, but it's still a purpose. And that's good. That's a tech for good. But I personally think that if you're running an ethical business, it's hard enough, right, for startups. And I think that's impact. So I have a really low bar for this. Then, but then you have to look at, is it scalable? Is it relevant? And from my perspective, I focus on financial services, so I only feel equipped to talk about financial service. I have a very simple definition. If it makes it easier for individuals to access products, to take credit, save better, invest in long-term assets, have risk cover from insurance, that's it. And it should address people at a lower and middle income level. I do not buy the idea that you can start a business with bottom of pyramid customers and achieve commercial returns. So as long as there is a lower and a middle income target focus with the products I mentioned, and in the regions I mentioned, so we don't fund businesses in developed markets, it's an emerging market focus. Those 3 filters, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is a super difficult question with, I've realized, a lot of gray areas where you just end up having to make some kind of personal decisions as to what you'll take on or not. Firstly, I'm not entirely sure I agree that scalability is a really important factor. I think within tech, it's sort of does definitely sort of naturally imply that there should be scalability to it, but more broadly within impact, I'm not sure that scalability has to matter. I was running my own startup for 5 years prior to coming into Angel Investment Network, and it just, everybody's question was always, how scalable is it? How scalable is it? How scalable is it? And it would drive me slightly crazy, because I think there's other impacts you can have than just scalability, though I do think tech helps hugely in that. Anyway, slight aside, sorry. I had to address that.
Actually, while you're there, I mean, that is quite interesting, and we will come back to talk about a little bit about impact, but you've been on both sides of the fence in a way, so the startup, you've been the one looking for investment, and you can tell us a little bit about your startup and whatever, but what were the kind of barriers in terms of trying to secure that?
So as an entrepreneur, I ran a food platform that connected talented chefs with underused spaces that enabled them to start setting up their food businesses, like pop-up supper clubs, etc. And we used to showcase those dinners on our platform for diners to come and attend them. And so it was a tech platform. And the idea was really to sort of bring on more diverse food businesses, support food entrepreneurs without the need for sort of huge investment, and also making use of underused spaces. Actually, what we realized was it was absolutely not scalable at all, and we were totally happy with that, but it made it incredibly challenging to find investment, because what we found is quality is super important. So when you're having these kind of dinners, the space needs to look really cool, the chef needs to be charismatic, the food needs to be great, people around the table need to be interesting. There's a lot of factors in it which made it quite quite an art form to get right in order to be great. And ultimately, everyone needed to have a great experience in order to come back. So what we really needed to do is focus on having good enough margins. That meant we could sort of repeat the business, have the right sponsors who could sort of help fund it as well. But in itself, it really... We meant for it to be scalable, by the way. You learn a lot of things along the way. But we realized it wasn't scalable, and we realized that what was important was the focus on quality. And that really didn't sit very well with investors, because everyone wants to see that hockey stick, and everyone wants to see the next billion-dollar company. And I bet between us, we can probably come up with the 10 same names as everyone else does out of the hundreds of thousands of businesses that have been created. So I was really keen to sort of try and move people. I am now on this side of the table really keen to move people's mindsets away from just purely scalability and mass reach, and also have sort of other look at other impacts, and maybe be more realistic about what return you're going to get. And actually 10x is not a bad return. It doesn't have to be 100,000x.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's very interesting to get the other side of the perspective. Teddy, you obviously are in a position where you will get startups coming to you and approaching you for funding. Does any of what Liv say resonate? And let's come back to that question of impact and how you understand and what you're looking for in terms of impact.
Yeah, no, I think it does actually, because Liv is very right. Not every business is or should be targeting that 100, 200, whatever return. I think it goes back to a very fundamental question around fit. So there has to be a fit between the founder, the business he or she is founding, trying to create, what their target outcome is, both commercially and on the social side, and also for the investor. The investor should be aware of what kind of return is possible. I mean, sometimes it's just kind of this, because it's so early. I mean, sometimes we just invest in a pitch deck and a great team. So it's hard to tell, but it's about thinking what that potential is. Are we aligned with the founders on what the vision for the company should be? If we're not, then we're not the right source of capital. My brother runs a chain of restaurants in LA. I would never invest in his restaurant because I don't know. I like my brother, but not that much. But no, I was kidding. But yeah, we're just not the right. They're also not doing very good socially. But really, seriously, we're just not the right type of investor for them. They will never generate, even if they have about 10 restaurants now, even if they had 100 restaurants, it wouldn't be the type of return that I would be looking for our fund. So that's a question on fit. On social impact, I'll be really brief. It's a very long answer, but for us, because we try to look for these lockstep models, for better or for worse, that potential for the breadth and depth of that impact has to be tied to the commercial opportunity. So I don't know if David said this from Winnow, but he often says this, I think. But for Winnow, it's tackling the $1 trillion global problem of food waste, right? For what their words, it's the 4 billion people on the planet who remain unaddressed. So there's a huge market opportunities, and the depth of that impact for those individuals may vary across different types of companies. But we look for that balance of breadth and depth, if you get what I'm saying.
Okay. And Ella, you talked about talked about mental health earlier on in the work that Zinc is doing, and that in a crude way you described it as a market opportunity, but of course it's providing services that people need and will improve their lives. What's the Zinc approach to looking for impact and good work in the world?
So again, I think it goes down to the founders. When they come up with the approach they want to take, they need to decide how they're going to measure impact. So some of them are actually thinking about clinical trials, and that is needed for them to be able to sell the services. So I think going back to this idea of what is the problem you're trying to solve for, who are the users, who are the customers, not necessarily the same at times, so who are your stakeholders. So in some cases, in some of the issues, actually they will need to prove that, and they will need to provide that clinical proof point for them to get to sell their services. In others, it will be about actually consumers valuing the services and thinking that makes an impact for them in their life. It's a B2C type of approach, in which case you don't necessarily need to show clinically trialed outcome, but actually by a person solving some of their own issues, empowering themselves. So go take an extreme example, calm.com. So that's a mind kind of meditation app. Now I think now they're potentially thinking about doing something a bit more clinical, but for a very long time they haven't done anything. They've claimed to have outcome, and people have actually said that they do see and they get accessibility to meditate, people who've never meditated before. So again, I think it depends on the product, it depends on the service, it depends on the users and the customers. The impact is, I think, embedded in the problem you're trying to solve for. So are you trying to solve for something that actually will make an impact on people's lives if you solve that problem? And that's kind of the question at the very beginning. So how they measure it, then later on it's down to them.
I think the world of tech for good is kind of still, I mean, as UK tech is more broadly, is still looking for the elusive kind of unicorn. It's been described as a zebra, I think, as well, as a sort of a purposeful billion-dollar company. And there are very few examples, I think, within the UK market of real breakthrough organisations that are doing stuff that has got good social purpose, but which are great businesses as well. We celebrated last year with Babylon Health, which is doing work with the NHS on a GP at hand, mobile appointments with your GP model. They're a VC-backed business, but they're also a for-good business, and it's starting to get engagement with the public, and that feels like a really good example to me of a kind of a crossover. What are the sort of examples that you've seen in your work of those kind of potential breakthrough businesses, or the stuff, perhaps some of the stuff that you're backing yourself? I know, LA, you're working with founders, so that question may not apply, but Teddy.
But I just wanted to pick up on that, because Babylon is an example we're using a lot, and I think their approach has been, I don't know if everyone knows their story and what they do, but they started with trying to sell to NHS, who said no. They went B2C, they got lots of traction. Then NHS came back and said, oh, okay, we want you. Because at the beginning they were going like, it's never going to work, and it's not clinically proven, etc. So I think we take that as an example where, and Paul came to speak in our kind of boot camp, and I see that as an example of an approach which is, there is an issue. and they were determined to solve it, and they wanted to use tech to solve that. So for me, they said, okay, you know what, we're just going to find a way to make it work. They went directly to consumers, empowering people to make the choices, and now they're scaling, across the world, and they're unapologetically kind of driven by, you know, a purpose and a commercial return. So for me, they are an amazing example of how the both can go hand in hand and should go hand in hand, and not necessarily thinking about governments. That's kind of your go-to customer, because actually they'll come to you if you do really good things, whereas at the beginning they might be more risk-averse to innovation.
Teddy, you're looking very pensive at this point.
Obviously, I can't talk about the companies that are here. I already mentioned the what 3 words are Winnow, so I have to think about someone else. And
But
basically,
tell us about Winnow. I mean, Winnow is a great example.
I mean, I could.
Farm is yours as well, no?
We Farm is not one of ours, no. It's okay. We Farm is one of Huayra's, so Michael can talk about them. And also Google's, so if Sim's is here. Because I don't like this question, I'm sorry, because it's like when people ask, what is your favorite company in your portfolio? I'm like, all of them? I mean, they're all my favorite. So I won't talk about maybe a company in our portfolio. And maybe I'll talk about something more controversial, which is you see a lot of these more really large companies. I used to work at BlackRock, and you guys probably, if you're plugged into the PEC scene, saw Larry Fink's. Yeah, you saw that, probably all of you. I also have qualms about that and the purpose of why that was written, the motivations. But you see a lot of companies that are doing more and more of these socially impactful things that may not actually be just greenwashing. It's actually beyond CSR. Because I think Orson on our team said this to me about a year ago, but he says it just costs too much to be bad now. Instead of being good, it just costs too much to be bad. And so you're seeing a lot of these, sometimes these perverse incentives are possibly the biggest drivers for change. I'm not just kidding. I think it's actually true. And yes, I have qualms about Larry Fink, and hopefully he won't say this, probably not. But I do like his purple ties, if you just see this. I think that's actually really important, because I touched on it earlier, but it's not just about thinking about these small kind of sexy startups or whatever. It's thinking about all the different stakeholders that make systemic change possible. Hopefully at Mustard Seed, we play a tiny little role in helping to solve for these problems. But it's going to be actually the big people, the incumbents, the government, people already entrenched in solving for these global problems that we need to have on our side to make this all positive and happen. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm
No, it should. Amir, do you agree that startups are a big media focus, and and that's understandable. They're exciting businesses, exciting entrepreneurs. But do you agree with what Teddy's saying about governments and bigger business having that role? And what are the examples that have excited you in terms of good investment?
Look, I spend half my time in Africa, and I focus only on investments in Africa. And I don't think startups from Africa are necessarily the focus of media. I would very much like them to be, but nobody cares. Has aid and development funding distorted markets? 100%. I could go on in Africa. Do I see a role for big platforms to drive some of the impact we're aiming for? Absolutely, yes. I mean, in financial services specifically, WhatsApp is powering payments in a bunch of the emerging markets, right? Facebook data is a good way to underwrite credit for customers who don't have a credit file, which is all the customers in Africa mostly. So yes, there is a role, and increasingly, I think in the thing in fintech used to be banks versus fintechs, and it was quite childish. And people now realize that hey, we need to work together and sleep in the same bed. And there are a lot of banks acquiring fintech, so I think the industry has reached that maturity level. But you also asked me, what is that big crossover company which could be the Facebook of tech for good? And I'll give you an answer, but we've invested about $1.2 billion in 600 companies. And I'll tell you what, it's too early to tell, right? And that's one of the things. Like, impact investing is the oldest vintage of our investment, 6 years. And that's too early to tell. Like, you're just starting, the first investments you made in 2010, you're just starting to see, okay, it's finally time where you could talk about it. And by now, I don't want to talk about them. It's too boring. It was 6 years ago, right? It's something new now, which interests me. But I'll give you an example of a company that could be a crossover success, which I just invested in, and it's incredible what they do. A lot of smallholder farmers in Africa don't have insurance, and so they're just buying fertilizers and hybrid seeds, which are quite costly, and praying to God. Like, hopefully there's rain. If there's no rain, they lose their entire investment, which then means they go into the poverty cycle because they've spent a lot of money. And without spending this money, they don't get harvest, right? So it's a vexing problem, but they don't have money to pay premiums. And there isn't enough money in premiums to send people to assess whether it rained or not on an individual farm. What do you do? So invested in this company, which is bundling this insurance with the seed bag. As soon as the farmer buys the seed bag, she's insured, and using satellite data to figure out whether it rained or not in the 21 days after they buy the seed bag, and making automated claim settlements so they can buy the seed bags again and not waste the season. And this is a $1 trillion opportunity.
And what's it called?
I cannot reveal the name because it's not public yet, but Google it, yes. It's one of the 2 in Africa.
Liv, you're presumably not so restrained by confidentiality, and the nature of crowdfunding, I guess, is that you want to make this is a public platform. So, what are you looking to support?
So, actually, there's a business that we just funded via the Angel Investment Network called Mimica, which I find super exciting. It's to do with food waste, tackling it from a different angle, and it's they've invented this label that you put onto, that they would sell to meat and dairy manufacturers, and the label essentially reacts to the food when it goes bad. So it goes all bumpy when the food goes bad, and so actually you can throw food away when it's actually gone off, rather than the sell-by date or the use-by date, which is just obviously, as we know, complete bollocks. So I'm really excited about that. It is scalable. I'm not saying scalable is bad. I'm just saying it's not critical to every business. This one does happen to be scalable, and I'm really excited about it because I think it's addressing a really, really big problem, which is, I think, pretty easy to solve. And this is a simple, cheap solution that can have a really, really big impact. There's one that we've just launched on Seed Tribe, actually, which I also find exciting, which is, didn't know, but apparently it's incredibly expensive and complicated administratively for charities to receive regular donations from companies. So this organization, tech platform called Work for Good, who essentially manage all of the paperwork and the administration, and significantly reduce the costs so that SMEs can support more charities. So that's something else I'm super excited about, because not only can more charities get funded, but it's actually also just great PR. You know, to your point earlier about, you know, we can't afford to be bad. It's true, right? Sometimes it's just necessity is what really, really helps drive change. And it's undeniable that companies can get good PR from doing good. So if they can use this as a means to show the good impact that they're having, I'm sure it'll drive better business for them, and along the way support more charities. So that's one that I'm super excited about having launched on our platform.
Great. Okay, well, Work for Good features in Digital Agenda this week, so check that out. Very interesting. Before the kind of hook yanks us off stage, I'm going to try and pull in one question from the Slido, which was about, and very appropriately, about exit, seeing as we're at the end of the session, which is about, can you comment about, you know, whether you can keep the faith going after exit? If you know, if a company that sets up with a social mission then gets bought by a bigger company, you know, that's an exit, and that's good in other spheres, but sometimes the social mission could get compromised. Is that something that resonates with you, or that you've seen, or what sort of advice would you have for organisations facing that dilemma?
I guess my opinion is only anecdotal, but I think what's really important with social mission is to ensure it's embedded into your articles, and for that to be included into any of the buyout agreement that you would have. Whether the company that buys you out then destroys it, you just have to have faith that they don't. But I think it's really important if you set that in stone. And for example, registering as a B Corp is incredibly helpful in order to help you not forget about that mission. That hopefully is a way to be able to continue it beyond. And then hopefully, if that's part of the agreement in the buyout, then you could argue that you would continue to have a much bigger impact due to the scale of the company buying you out. So that's my hope. Other people might have more experience of it.
I'm not particularly worried about that because I think a lot of strategic exits are from larger players who haven't penetrated the lower middle income markets. And so the reason they're buying these companies is to address, quote, the emerging consumer, who's been emerging for God knows how many years, hasn't emerged yet. But we have a microinsurance company that allows people to take small insurances and pay back premiums through their prepaid balance, right? And all the big insurers are quoting them because they just don't have a way to address this market. And they hope that they will build a segment that will eventually rise up the middle class to their profitable segment. So they won't change their business model because the reason they're buying them is to address these consumers. And that's most of the strategic interest that I have in our companies. So it's specific to our investments, but I'm not worried.
That is.
I really like this question. So, because because it's quite important. It's something that our LPs, our investors, ask us all the time. Because I mentioned lockstep I think 6 times already. It's my 7th time using that word. I might be wrong. Fact check me on that one. But we think about it actually even before thinking about exit. So we had one opportunistic exit in our first year from our early days of investing. It was a company that got acquired by Canon called Lifecake. But it's something we think about even before even those conversations surface or begin to surface. Because as a company grows and more people join that company, the nature of a business can change. I mean, we've seen some of our businesses pivot every 3 months if necessary, right? I mean, we invested in a pitch deck, so who knows what the business is going to be 6 months from now, let alone 3-5 years. So there's 2 ways of thinking about this, I think. And Liv touched on it earlier, which is around governance and structure, which, because it's a nascent space, there's actually not that much, and there's not much you can lock in. So all of our companies put in their mission statements, their social impact mission into their articles. That is one thing. But the more important thing for us, it comes back to the word I think was mentioned earlier in the first question, which is purpose. Purpose can mean tons of different things, but if there is alignment in purpose, purpose is what drives passion and perseverance, which ultimately is the grit you want to see in your founders and your entrepreneurs, in all the people you hire, to make sure when stuff goes wrong that they persevere and get it right. So it's a question that must actually be asked even before we think about exits. Coming to exits, though, I think I'll echo a lot of what was just said, because if this business that we invest in is indeed a lockstep business, then it's solving for a problem that's inherently part of that business. So anyone looking to acquire that business would want to acquire what the business is achieving. Mm-hmm. It's, part and parcel. So that's what we believe in.
Okay. Ella, last word. I know your founders are coming in right at the start of the process and probably aren't thinking about exit yet, but what do you do to kind of ensure that kind of purpose can see right through the business cycle to when they get acquired or invested in at the other end?
So we have a few of them here, but I think a lot of people already mentioned a lot of the techniques in terms of how to ensure that, but I want to offer maybe 2 other perspectives. One is, I think that's the case for any acquisition or any exit strategy. So a founder starts a business with a purpose, it grows, it changes, it acquires, someone acquires it might change. So I don't think it's just for impact or social good, it's the purpose or the reason why the business was founded. So I think that's a business decision that every founder or shareholder will have to make. B, I think there are a few examples if you think about really large kind of acquisitions like Ben & Jerry's, The Body Shop, Innocent. Some of them were acquired by the likes of Unilever, which I think is one of the best examples of where purpose, impact, returns, profit, all are combined well as a business. Others by Coca-Cola. I think The Body Shop is L'Oreal. Is it? Yeah. And they've kept, I think, their DNA. So again, I think you're right. They're buying something that those companies saw an opportunity because they thought those companies represented the impact, the access to users, things that people love. So I think there are examples where it's successful, and I think that's a decision that any business would have to make anyway on an exit kind of decision.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are out of time. But hopefully that's been as interesting to you as it was for me. Ella from Zinc, Teddy from Mustard, Maya from Media, and Liv from the Angel Investment Network. Thank you so much indeed.